The cabin burned against the midnight sky, while Elara walked toward the police cars with a digital recorder held high, her face covered in ash. The truth was in her hand. Everything else, the embezzlement, the framing, the sister's betrayal, the bomb, the twisted partnership of a decade, was written in the voice of a man who had thought himself untouchable. 13 hours earlier, she had discovered that her best friend and business partner was a ghost. Elara sat at her mahogany desk, with her eyes fixed on the dual-monitor setup. The right monitor displayed a banking portal crowned with a red "Insufficient Funds" banner across the main balance tab. Her right hand clicked the optical mouse rapidly, again and again, as if repetition might change what she was seeing. The hum of the computer fan filled the silence of the office. She leaned forward, her shoulders hunched, her brow furrowed, her lips pressed into a tight line. The account ending in 9992 showed 0.00. She reached for a ledger bound in black leather. The pages crackled as she flipped through them until October appeared. Her finger traced a line that read, "Transfer to Phoenix. Oct 12, $500,000. The handwriting was in blue ink, neat and precise. The same handwriting she had seen on 1,000 documents over the past decade. The same handwriting that had approved every major decision the company had ever made. The office door swung open. Mark entered carrying 2 white cardboard coffee cups. His tailored gray suit caught the morning light. His face held the warm, disarming smile that had become as familiar to her as her own reflection. He set one cup on the corner of her desk, the plastic lid clicking against the wood. Steam rose from the small hole at the top. "Don't stress the audit, El," he said, his voice soothing and brotherly. "We've been solid for 10 years. Drink your latte." Elara looked up at him. Her eyes were glassy with panic. Without speaking, she pointed at the monitor. Mark leaned over, squinting at the screen. His hand came to rest on her shoulder, reassuring and warm. The red glow of the banner reflected across his face. "Mark, it's gone," Elara said, her voice breathless and terrified. "The Phoenix funds. They weren't transferred to the contractor. They just vanished." His face shifted. The warmth drained away, replaced by a mask of shock. He gripped the back of her chair hard enough that his knuckles whitened. With his other hand, he pulled his phone from his pocket and began tapping rapidly across the screen, his fingers moving as though checking bank alerts. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. "I'll call the bank's security head right now," he said, his voice determined and protective. "Someone hacked us, Elara. I won't let them take what we built." But when Elara glanced at his phone screen before he turned it away, she saw only a contacts list, not a bank app, not a single alert. His fingers had been dancing across nothing at all. She didn't ask him about it. Not then. The attack came that evening in the parking garage. Elara walked briskly toward her silver SUV, her heels echoing on the concrete. The garage was empty, the fluorescent overhead lights flickering intermittently. She held her key fob in her right hand, her thumb hovering over the unlock button. Her eyes checked over her shoulder every few steps. The only sound was the distant hum of the ventilation fan somewhere deep in the structure. A tall figure stepped out from behind one of the concrete pillars. Black hoodie, medical mask. The man moved without hesitation. He swung a tire iron. It struck the side of her SUV with a deafening metallic clang just as she reached for the door handle. The impact created a deep dent in the silver paneling. Elara screamed. She swung her heavy leather briefcase at the attacker's head. It connected with his shoulder, and he stumbled back. But only for a moment. He lunged forward and grabbed her throat with his free hand, his gloved fingers tightening around her neck. The pressure was immense. She couldn't breathe. Her vision began to narrow at the edges. Elara drove her knee upward into his groin with all the force she could muster. The man grunted and doubled over. She wrenched her throat free from his grip, gasping for air, and slammed her palm into the top of his head. He fell to one knee. His hands came up to protect himself from further blows. She didn't wait. She ran. Elara sprinted toward the garage stairwell, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, she heard the sound of the attacker standing up, shaking his head. He didn't chase her. He simply picked up the envelope that had fallen from her coat, her bank records printed that morning, and walked calmly toward a black sedan parked in the shadows. He watched her disappear into the stairwell before he drove away. The next morning, Elara drove to First National Bank. She stuffed the documents back into the box, but kept the Adrian Cross passport. She slid it into her waistband and covered it with her navy blazer. Her eyes darted to the security camera mounted in the corner of the room. She didn't look at it directly. She simply moved. Her movements were economical now, efficient, careful. She exited the bank and stepped onto the sidewalk. Across the street, Mark's black SUV was parked at the curb. She could see him sitting in the driver's seat, staring at the bank entrance. His expression was cold and expressionless. He didn't wave. He didn't move. He simply watched her with the intensity of someone observing a subject in a laboratory. Their eyes met for a moment across the distance. Then she turned and walked away. The conference room was silent, except for the hum of the projector. Mark stood at the head of the polished oak table, his tie perfectly knotted, his suit immaculate. Behind him, a spreadsheet glowed on the wall. Several lines were highlighted in yellow, showing what appeared to be Elara's digital signature on multiple transfer documents. The timestamp read 03:44 a.m. Board Member 1, a man everyone called the Suit, sat with his hands folded. Board Member 2, the company lawyer, reviewed the papers in front of him without expression. "I didn't want to believe it," Mark said, his voice grave and reluctant, his head bowed slightly, as if the weight of his words was almost too much to bear. But the logs show Elara logged in from her home IP address to move the Phoenix funds to an account in her maiden name. It's all here. Time-stamped, verified, digital signatures confirmed. Elara stood up. She slammed her hands on the table. The water glasses rattled. "You're lying," she screamed. "I was asleep at 3 a.m. Mark, tell them the truth." Her voice echoed in the room. But Mark met her gaze with an expression of practiced pity. His eyes were sad, his shoulders slumped with disappointment. He looked like a man betrayed by his oldest friend. The Suit slid a manila folder across the table toward Elara. Inside were photographs. Grainy, hard to see clearly. But there was a woman, Elara, meeting with a masked man in a parking garage. In the photo, she appeared to be handing him a briefcase. "The police are downstairs, Elara," the Suit said, his voice monotone and final. "We suggest you cooperate." Mark walked around the table and leaned close to Elara's ear. His voice dropped to a low, chilling rasp. His breath was warm against her skin. "I'll give you 1 hour to run before I give them the passwords to your secret crypto wallet," he whispered. "Make it count, El." Elara pushed through the heavy steel fire door and began sprinting down the concrete stairs. Her breathing was ragged. She held her blazer tight around the hidden passport. The stairs seemed to go on forever, spiraling downward in a dizzying pattern. Emergency exit signs glowed red in the darkness. Her footsteps echoed loudly against the concrete. She could hear voices shouting somewhere above her, But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. A burly guard with a Vanguard security patch blocked the landing 3 floors below. He pulled his baton and extended it with a sharp metallic snap. The weapon straightened with a sound like a threat. He didn't reach for his radio. He simply waited. "Mr. Vance said you might try the stairs," he said, his voice rough and menacing. "Back up, lady." Elara didn't slow down. She used the momentum of her descent to launch herself forward. She swung her heavy laptop bag at the guard's face. The corner of the bag struck his eye. He shouted in pain. His baton clattered against the metal railing and fell away. For a moment, he was defenseless. That moment was all she needed. The guard recovered quickly. He reached out and grabbed her hair. Elara screamed and drove her elbow into his throat. He gagged and released her immediately. She pushed him hard, using all her weight against his body. He tumbled backward down the half-flight of stairs, landing in a heap on the landing below. He lay motionless. Elara leaped over his body and burst through the ground floor exit door. Sunlight hit her face, bright and sudden. She stumbled into the alleyway, her heart pounding, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, she could hear the sound of the security guard groaning, beginning to move. She ran. Elara hid behind a dumpster in the alley, her back pressed against the dirty brick wall. She pulled her emergency burner phone from her pocket. It began vibrating instantly. The caller was listed as private line. She stared at the screen for a moment before she answered. A familiar female voice came through the speaker. It was her sister, Sarah. "Don't be mad, Elara," Sarah said. Her voice was cold and entitled, completely lacking in the warmth Elara had come to expect from the only family she had left. "Mark promised me a life you never could. Just give him the passport and this all goes away." Elara looked at the Adrian Cross passport in her hand. She understood then. Sarah had given Mark her home security codes. Sarah had revealed her maiden name. Sarah had been providing him with information for months, maybe longer. "How long, Sarah?" Elara asked. Her voice was low and dangerous. "How long have you been helping him kill me?" The phone went dead. A moment later, a text message arrived on her main phone. It contained a photograph of her house. Her own house, the place where she had lived for 7 years. A red target had been drawn over it using digital editing software. The crosshair was centered directly on her front door. Elara sat down behind the dumpster and closed her eyes. The remote cabin was dark when Elara entered it. She dripped water onto the wooden floor, leaving a trail from the door. She didn't turn on the lights. She reached for the fireplace, moving through the darkness by memory. She found the loose floorboard near the hearth and pulled it up. Her hand reached into the hidden space and closed around cold metal. A Glock 17. She had purchased it years ago, before she met Mark, back when she was still alone and afraid of breaking down. Mark clicked a flashlight on from the corner armchair. He was sitting there, waiting. The tire iron lay across his lap. He looked disheveled, his hair matted with sweat, his shirt untucked. The warm, friendly persona was completely gone. In its place was something raw and manic, something that had perhaps always been there beneath the surface, wearing a mask. "I knew you'd come here," he said, his voice mocking and triumphant. "It's the only place you didn't list in the partnership agreement." Mark lunged forward from the chair. He swung the tire iron at her chest. Elara rolled away, and the iron smashed into the wooden coffee table instead, splintering it. She tried to aim the gun at him, but he kicked her wrist hard. The gun flew from her hand and skittered across the floor. It slid under the heavy oak dining table, disappearing into shadow. Elara grabbed the fireplace poker. The cast iron was heavy in her hands. She swung it and caught Mark in the ribs. He wheezed and dropped the tire iron, but he didn't fall. Instead, he tackled her to the rug. They hit the ground hard, the air punching out of her lungs. They grappled on the floor, fighting for position, for breath, for control. Mark got his hands around Elara's throat. She felt her vision beginning to darken. Her fingers scrabbled blindly behind her, searching for anything that could serve as a weapon. Her hand closed around a heavy glass vase. She brought it down against the side of his skull with all the strength she had left. Glass shattered. Blood sprayed across the rug. Water from the flowers soaked into the fibers. Mark screamed and released her throat. She gasped for air, coughing violently, her lungs burning. Mark lay on the floor, his head bleeding, but he started laughing. His laugh was high and manic, completely unhinged. He pulled a small remote from his pocket and pressed a button. Red lights began flashing on a device tucked under the sofa. A rhythmic beeping filled the cabin, accelerating. "I've already sent the confession from your email," he said, gasping between laughs. "Elara Vance kills partner and ends it all. The police got it 30 minutes ago. They're on their way now. When they arrive, they'll find you standing over my body with a gun and a dead man at your feet. The confession explains everything. The embezzlement, the affair, the crime of passion. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison, Elle, or you'll take the easy way out. Either way, I win." Elara frantically checked her laptop on the counter. Her inbox displayed a sent message to the police department and the entire board. The subject line read, "My final act." The timestamp showed 1 minute ago. The message contained a detailed confession, written in her voice, using facts only she would know. It described how she had secretly redirected the Phoenix funds to cover an affair. How she had planned to frame Mark. How she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. It was perfect. Perfectly constructed. Perfectly damning. She looked out the window. Blue and red lights appeared in the distance, winding up the narrow cabin road. The police were minutes away. Outside, the rain pounded against the glass. Inside, the bomb beeped faster. The timer read 02.0. She was trapped. A bomb in the house. A bleeding man on the floor. The police arriving to find a confessed killer. The confession sent. The frames placed. The evidence fabricated. "There's no way out," Elara whispered to herself. He thought of everything. But then her eyes landed on something. Her wet blazer lay on the floor where she had dropped it. She remembered the hidden compartment. She had purchased the blazer from a specialty shop, one designed for business travelers who needed to carry sensitive documents. She reached into the pocket, and her fingers closed around a small object. It was a digital recorder. She had used it to record board meetings for years, keeping her own records to protect herself. It was a habit born from paranoia, from a lifetime of protecting herself against people who might take advantage. She had inserted it into her blazer pocket that morning out of pure instinct. She never went anywhere without it anymore. She hit play. The recording began from the moment she entered the cabin. Mark's voice filled the speaker, crystal clear and undeniable. "I knew you'd come here. It's the only place you didn't list in the partnership agreement. Then, I've already sent the confession from your email. Elara Vance kills partner and ends it all. Then, when they arrive, they'll find you standing over my body with a gun and a dead man at your feet." Every word, every confession, every piece of his plan, narrated by the architect himself. The timer on the bomb hit 0030. Elara grabbed her laptop, the Adrian Cross passport, and the digital recorder. She looked at Mark, who was struggling to crawl toward the door, leaving a trail of blood behind him. "The truth is a person, Mark," she said, her voice icy and sharp. "And she's leaving." Elara dived through the back window head first. Her arms came up to shield her face. Glass shattered and cut her skin. She hit the muddy earth and rolled down a small embankment, her body tumbling through the undergrowth. Her ribs exploded with pain as she struck a fallen log. She lay there for a moment, gasping, unable to move. Then the cabin erupted. The explosion was a ball of orange fire that tore upward into the night sky. The shockwave traveled outward in a concentric wave. It knocked Elara flat against the ground, pressed her into the mud. The sound was deafening, a boom that seemed to come from inside her own chest. Debris rained down in the woods around her. Splinters of wood, bits of metal, ash and fire and destruction. The night sky turned bright orange for a moment, casting everything in an apocalyptic glow. Then the flames began to settle, and the orange faded to a more normal darkness, punctuated by the dancing red and orange of the fire that now consumed what remained of the cabin. Elara stood up, covered in mud and soot. She held the digital recorder high above her head. The device was small and black, easily overlooked. But in that moment, it was the most powerful object in the world. She walked toward the flashing sirens of the 3 police cruisers that had just arrived at the end of the cabin drive. Her movements were steady. Her face was expressionless. The sirens screamed. The fire roared behind her. Her silhouette moved against the backdrop of the burning structure like a figure from a nightmare or dream, depending on which side of the law you stood. The police officers stopped when they saw her. They drew their weapons. She didn't stop walking. She raised her other hand, the one not holding the recorder, to show she was unarmed. "My name is Elara Vance," she said as she walked into the red and blue lights. "I'm the victim of a conspiracy, and I have evidence." Detective Miller was grizzled and professional. He sat across from Elara in an interrogation room, a metal table between them. On the table lay the Adrian Cross passport, the insurance policy with a final liquidation note, and the digital recorder. "We found Mark alive in the wreckage," Miller said, his voice professional and impressed. "He's talking to the DA to avoid the death penalty. He's naming names. Apparently, there was a third player. Your sister." Elara said nothing. She simply watched as Miller pressed play on the recorder. Mark's voice filled the small room. "I've already sent the confession from your email." Detective Miller slid a photograph across the table. It showed Sarah, Elara's sister, being led into a police car in handcuffs. She looked at the camera with a mix of rage and shame. Her face was twisted with anger, not at herself, but at the world, at everyone around her, at the injustice she felt had been done to her by not being born into money. Elara stared at the photograph for a long moment, then looked away. 3 months later, Elara sat in a new office. The space was sun-drenched, filled with light from floor-to-ceiling windows. She could see the city skyline spread out below her, glittering and alive. She sat at a glass desk, not mahogany, but something modern and clean. On the desk lay a legal document that dissolved the old partnership completely. She held a brand new fountain pen. The tip touched the paper and she signed her name. The pen scratched against the page as she wrote each letter. Elara-Vance. She set the pen down and opened her laptop. She logged into a private offshore banking portal. The security was complex. Multiple passwords, biometric verification, physical tokens. She typed the final password and waited for the system to authenticate her. The account balance loaded on the screen. 500,000. What are ours? Status. Secured. Elara looked at the number and allowed herself a small, knowing smile. She hadn't been framed for moving the Phoenix funds. She had tracked the transfer herself, weeks before Mark had made his move. She had intercepted the money in the offshore system and redirected it to an account he didn't know about. She had been protecting herself all along, playing a game he didn't even realize was being played. She had won because she had anticipated losing. Trust is earned, she said softly to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. Loyalty is expensive. Elara closed the laptop with a definitive click. She picked up a framed photo from her desk, a picture of herself and Mark from years ago. They were smiling at the camera. His arm was around her shoulders. She looked happy. He looked warm and genuine. It was a moment that had never really existed. A carefully constructed lie captured in emulsion and light. She stared at the photo for a moment, then dropped it into the metal trash can beside her desk. The frame hit the rim and tumbled inside. Glass shattered against metal. The photo fell face down in the bin, the smiling faces now invisible, buried under discarded papers and emptiness. Elara didn't look at it again. She turned toward the window and looked out at the city. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of rebuilding the company. She would do it alone this time. With a new team of people she would choose carefully. She would verify everything. She would trust no one completely. She had learned what trust cost. She had learned what betrayal could buy. She picked up her briefcase. New leather, unmarked, nothing like the one she had swung at the attacker in the parking garage, and stood up. She turned off the lights in her office. The room fell into darkness, then slowly began to glow with the light from the sunset. She walked toward the door, her footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floor. Behind her, the photo in the trash can was already being forgotten. The memory of Mark's face, the sound of his voice, the warmth of his touch, all of it was becoming abstracted, generalized, less real with each passing moment. She opened the office door and stepped into the hallway. The elevator was at the end of the corridor. She pressed the button and waited for it to arrive. The mechanical sounds of the building surrounded her. The hum of electricity, the whisper of air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic from the streets below. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed,